Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today I want to provide you a quick analogy to help you understand the difference between strength and muscle. So let's get to it. So I often get hit with the criticism on this channel, CP, your muscle is going to be useless in an SHTF scenario. So I want to set the record straight about the differences between muscle and strength. Now, in order to perform work, you need what's called lean mass. All lean mass is mass which is performing some sort of function. So basically anything but adipose tissue or fat. Fat doesn't actually perform any work. It does act as a fuel source for work to be performed, but in itself, it doesn't actually do anything like your skeletal, your tendons, your muscles, your blood vessels. They're composed of very active organic material. So if we wanted to build a city, what we would need first is roads into that area in order to start building things. So you can liken muscle to roads. Now, a productive city, or strength as we'll say, requires both muscle and the innervation of that muscle tissue. Innervation. Basically, that means you need nerves penetrating deep into those muscle fibers to actually allow them to contract more efficiently. You can have musculature which isn't properly innervated and thus is potentially less capable of performing different types of work. So you can liken the nerves that are innervating that muscle to power lines. In order to build a thriving city, you need power lines. Indeed, you need a lot more things, but we're not going to complicate the analogy too much. Maybe in future videos, we'll talk about where fat fits into the picture, how waterworks factor into the metaphor, and all the other things that go into urban planning. But for now, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to focus on roadways and power lines, and we're also going to talk a bit about population density because this is a big factor here. So I'm going to post a little 2x2 graph here to show the 4 different outcomes which you can have depending on whether you have a lot of roads and a lot of power lines or not many power lines and not many roads. So you can have a situation where you have a lot of roadways and you have a lot of power lines. That is going to be a very highly productive and capable city. That's going to be most likened to the strongman physique. So you're going to have a lot of muscle, and the training that strongmen do allows them to build lots of power lines into those muscles so that they can activate them all, even if only for short periods of time. You also have the case of a bodybuilder who has a lot of roadways, but they don't have a lot of power lines to those roadways yet. So the population density in those regions is going to be much lower. Thus, they're not going to be able to perhaps move as much weight as efficiently as a person who is very strong. They're going to have the raw infrastructure there, meaning there's a lot of muscle, but they can't really do much with that muscle at this point in time because the power lines are not laid down yet. Now, looking at this graph, you can see that there's another scenario in which you don't have many roadways, but you have a lot of power lines. So this person doesn't have a lot of muscle necessarily, but they have a lot of innervation to those muscle tissues. This would be more akin to an endurance athlete or just an athletic person in general. Whereas you also have a scenario where you have very few power lines and few roads. What that's going to equate to most is somebody who doesn't do a lot of athletic or fitness training whatsoever. So in that analogy, then you have raw, unbroken land, maybe a few meandering trails here and there. However, it doesn't have the capacity to do a lot of work. It does have a lot of potential, and this is the great takeaway from this metaphor. No matter where you are in your urban development planning, there's always a lot of potential with raw, unbroken ground. You can carve it out the way you like. Now, you can have muscular imbalances. If you look at the bodybuilding example, you can build a lot of roads in certain places where you might not need them, and thus they're not going to be able to, of course, effectively perform work or necessarily translate into that. But what I want to say with regards to bodybuilding is that a lot of people harp on bodybuilders and say, oh, you know, they don't have the strength to do this and their muscle is all for show. That may be the case right now, but I guarantee you, if one of those bodybuilders took up a strength training regimen within 3 months, they would probably be performing close to a level of a lot of strong men in their weight class, because it's simply a matter of them now building those power lines to that muscle that they've activated. Building the muscle is very complicated. Building the roadways, breaking the land is probably one of the most complicated things that you can do when it comes to physical fitness. Adding the power lines afterwards is actually a much less painful process. For example, bodybuilding, if done properly, is a much more painful style of training. You get that lactic acid buildup, you get that pump buildup, which, yeah, it can be an exhilarating feeling, but at the same time, if you're doing it properly, it's also quite painful because you're putting your muscles under a lot of stress for a longer time under tension. Whereas strongman training, yes, it's hard work. It takes a lot of energy and effort in order to lift large amounts of weight. It's not as physically painful a process as bodybuilding is. Now, right now I'm doing this cutting thing. I might go down to 180. Hell, I might even go down to 175. It depends on how ripped I decide to get. And the reason why I say decide is because it's not a hard thing to do. It's just a choice. You just eat less, train more. It's simple. There's nothing hard to it. You don't have to go for these fad diets, all this gimmicky bullshit. Forget about all that. Eat less, train more. End of story. You don't need a Fitbit. You don't need a personal trainer. You don't need to, get all of this fancy technology. Eat less, train more. That's all there is to it. You probably want to hit a ballpark of between 10, maybe 10 is a little on the lower side, probably between 12 to 15% body fat is ideal when it comes to preparedness, because obviously, it's a famine type thing that you're preparing for, or a deprivation of resources that you might have to use. So you don't want to be so lean that you have all this muscle and no adipose tissue to fuel it. You want to have enough body fat on you to fuel that muscle at least through the hardest of times, because inevitably everybody's going to be losing a lot of weight post SHTF because we're just not going to have enough calories to sustain all of that weight. Now, but the idea though is still there's a lot of benefits to being strong, to being physically fit, which easily make up for the extra calories that I might make a day. My ability to be physically superior than somebody who perhaps wants to come and take my shit is obviously going to be advantageous for me. They're going to be less likely to do it in the first place because indeed, whether you like it or not, there's an intimidation factor. Yes, there's those little man complexes out there who are going to try to challenge you just because you're bigger than them. Regardless, for the most part, most people are going to avoid a hard target. It's just the way of nature. For example, animals out in the wilderness, if you look weak, if you look frail, that's the one that's going to be the target of the predator. If you're walking through the bush, you hold your head up high, you've taken long strides, you look like you have a lot of energy, you look like you know what you're doing, animals are going to pick up on that and they're going to leave you alone. They're going to get out of your way. You're going to be seen as a hard target. But if you're just kind of sauntering through the woods, weak, not really paying a lot of attention to your surroundings, you look tired, fatigued, dehydrated, some opportunistic predator may try to pounce on that opportunity, literally. There's a lot to be said just about the deterrence of having a very good physique and not being messed with. I can attest to this all the time. Usually in winter, I add on about 20 pounds. And I just find that for some reason, people seem to get out of my way a bit more. Maybe I appear more intimidating. It's not like I'm trying to do that necessarily. Obviously, there's a component to that unconsciously with any sort of self-improvement. But it's not my goal to try to scare people necessarily. Scare bad guys, but not scare good people. But when I cut down like I am now to like 180 or something like that, even though technically I'm in much better physical condition, I can move pretty much just as much weight. I'm just as strong. I have more endurance. I have more speed, more agility. All of those attributes are improved. People seem to be less intimidated because unless I'm wearing a tight shirt like this to show off the definition, people actually perceive me to be less physically capable. Therein lies the problem with the big guy, little guy distinction and why a lot of people have misconceptions about that. You can have somebody who has the puffy muscle syndrome, who really has very little definition and isn't nearly as strong as they look. And you can have another guy who's really ripped and skinny and you put a baggy shirt on him, you wouldn't be able to tell him from somebody who is unfit. A lot of these bodybuilders, when they walk around at cutting season, not like the professional guys who are on steroids, but the natural ones, you wouldn't be able to tell they're bodybuilders if they're in a long sleeve shirt that's loose fitting. You just wouldn't be able to tell. but get those guys at bulking season, they're going to fill out, they're going to round out, and that's going to create a more intimidating presence. Everything in nature, in order to seem more intimidating or in order to ward off some kind of attack, tries to make itself look bigger, just like a peacock or whatever. Any sort of animal tries to make itself look bigger. The bear stands on its hind legs, etc. It's just a natural instinct to try to make yourself look bigger than you are. It's a very strategic thing to do, and it's something which should not be underestimated in an SHTF situation. But I'm interested to know if you can help me build upon this analogy of streets and power lines when it comes to understanding size, strength, and muscle, and all the rest. And I hope that some of the stuff that I'm talking about here is helping you keep motivated towards reaching your goals, because really survivalism and preparedness, I believe, is an excellent motivational tool. There's no better motivation for you to want to pull yourself together, pick up your life, take control of your life, than understanding the frailty of our civilization and the fact that at any time, yeah, the crap could hit the fan and you'd be left to your own devices to survive. So that can be a very good motivational thought for people. And if that's going to motivate you to be healthier, to live a more prosperous life, then in my opinion, I think that's great. And even if nothing were to ever happen, you'd have the peace of mind of knowing that you were prepared if it did. And of course, having a good physique, eating healthy, doing productive things with your life is gonna just be generally a beneficial thing for you and your family. You can support the channel by either picking yourself up a bug out roll, one of the most unique backpacking systems and way to organize your gear in the field that's available right now. I'll post a link to that in the description, or you can shop by the Amazon store link in the description. Doesn't cost you anything else. Basically, it's just a portal for you to go through. I get a little bit of commission on the basis of that helps me fund this operation. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.